So I'm Catherine Preston. I'm one of the programmers for the Film Festival and the Film Society. We are so thrilled to have Miracle Fishing as a part of our lineup this year. It is such an incredible movie, and for those who were able to watch it online, thank you for joining us. And I am joined, of course, by the director and editor of the film, Miles Hargrove. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. So if you have questions at home, please feel free to submit them. But in the meantime, I can kick us off. I would love to hear, a little bit more about how, like, why you made this movie now, how you got here now. You said in other interviews you've been working on this for a while, so I would love to hear how it finally came to be.
Well, it happened now because I would have tried to have done it I was trying to do it for years, and I thought I would have it done in the early 2000s. So it was never the plan, obviously, for it to take 25 years, which is exactly what it took to finish it. But just life and circumstances, and I went into it with a really naive idea of that, that it would be fairly easy to make, but I had to learn how to edit. I had to, go do the interviews, get the money together to do all that stuff. And it just took time. And then I realized I needed to maybe partner with somebody to help finish it out. And that went on for a number of years before I finally found a partner that was willing to let me have a meaningful role in my own film, because I just didn't have the experience as a director yet at that point. I finally got a partner, and in 2008, the stock market fell apart, and that deal went under the table. And my mom was diagnosed with cancer almost immediately afterwards, and then she died within a year, and my dad followed 15 months later. So it was just one blow after the other, starting in 2008. And so when 2011, by the time my dad passed away, there was no way that I was ready to delve back into the footage. So I just put it away and just use that time to work on other people's films or do smaller projects of my own, to just gain the experience that I needed, as a storyteller. So finally, in about 2016, 2017, I started really thinking, I'm not getting any younger. I could see the 25-year mark coming. And I was like, I can't just let this be something that's in my life like this. Because for me, all decisions that I've made, like even living in the city that I live in, were because I felt like I couldn't go on and do something else until I've completed this film. So it's had a huge impact on, on all these decisions in my life. And it was time, and it was just this sort of feeling of now or never. And so I just put my head down and just sat right here and just started working away.
And what was that emotional process like? You have, of course, the trauma of this event in your life that you're revisiting, but then also the passing of your parents adds another layer to it, I imagine.
Yeah, particularly in the beginning when I got back into the footage and having not heard my parents' voices for so many years and stuff, it was extremely emotional. It was very, very hard. But much like the kidnapping, I didn't start filming the kidnapping right away, but like when it all first happened, we were all in panic mode. And then we became used to our situation, just as you do. And it's sort of the same thing with the editing. Like, it was very, very emotional to see my parents. And then you just start to get used to it, you in a way, numb to it. But then, that's just hearing their voices and seeing their faces. But then as sequences would start to come together, then that emotion would start coming back, because like for me, that's how I put things together, was tried to remember how I felt, at the time during the kidnapping or whatever. And so I would even though I got used to seeing them and hearing them, then when I would kind of complete some sort of piece of the film and I would see it, working together and music's going and all that, I would relive it all over again. And if I didn't feel it 10 times more than what the audience feels when they're watching it, then it wasn't right, for me. So that was kind of the way I judge things.
Sure. Something that really I noticed in experiencing this film was all of the sort of leisure downtime, because, you know, of course, this horrible thing is happening. It's all you're thinking about, really. It's always looming. But there's so much space for, you know, playing cards, listening to opera, being embarrassed, having big dinners, all of this real family stuff happening. And I just really loved that. And what was that experience like then, kind of living with this daily sort of terror, but also making space for normal, whatever, normal life?
Well, first, thanks for your words about that. That, you know, that stuff is so important to me, and it's what sets, you know, in my opinion, what sets the film apart from other films about this similar subject matter. I mean, it could have just been completely a thriller, and that just wasn't. But that's not the story I wanted to tell. I mean, that's how we survived this ordeal, was by, it took so long. It was over such a long period of time. And, you know, it's hard to imagine that when you're watching something that's an hour and a half or hour and 45 minutes long or whatever, because it's obviously so compact. But there was so much time that we just had to do things and have things to look forward to that were normal, that made our lives feel normal. Those dinners at the end of every day were the only real thing that we had to look forward to. And it was an opportunity for us to kind of like talk about how we were feeling, or talk about how the case was going, and make all these like critical decisions that we had to make. For me, it's the spirit of the film. It's not what most people would think about. You know, is like, how you've got to get dinner together. I mean, this is, but I think that's where maybe like a general audience can maybe relate to the film in the best way, because, you know, even if you look at the situation that we're in today with the pandemic, and it's hard, and it's taking a long time, and the way we have to get through every single day is by winning these little battles, whether it's making dinner or you know, whatever, just making sure that we're living our lives, because we, you know, it could have gone on for years. It went on for an incredibly long time to us, and we just could not have been lived in a constant state of anxiety and just like sheltering ourselves into, you know, dark little corners or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. We have a question from the audience. The question is, what was the reaction of your brother and the people closest to the situation to the film? What was the reaction?
So that's been an interesting process, because the film was originally intended to premiere in Tribeca, and it was my dream to get that team, the whole group together for the first time, well, in 25 years. I mean, we've seen various members of the team, but not everybody together as one, and nobody had seen it. And so to me, that was going to be the greatest like moment, that, you know, in those really dark moments of trying to make the film, and like, am I ever going to get it done? It's like, I have to be there in a theater and see their faces when they see this event like that unfolded, that was so important in their lives. And here it is 25 years later. I didn't obviously get that opportunity because of Tribeca, but it's been a little bit piecemeal. Some members haven't seen it and some have. We did our international premiere at Oldenburg in Germany a few weeks ago, and the German family, well, actually just Claudia and Uli, the mom and dad, were able to be in the audience and watch it for the first time. And it was, I was able to, they had a camera in the audience, and I was able to see their reactions afterwards. So it was the next best thing, but it was incredible. It was incredibly emotional. It's an emotional thing for everybody. And for them, they were, I think most people immediately recognize as a family member what it meant for my dad or for my mom's husband to be kidnapped. But for people that were so close to us, like Robert, the negotiator, or the Griner family, when it was all over, they were traumatized as well. They didn't have as much to lose, but they were traumatized as well. And and I don't think people just immediately understood just their connection to the story. And this film is living proof of what of the sacrifices that they made, you know, to help us. So, and my brother, he saw it recently at a drive-in screening in Dallas. So his reaction was really interesting, very emotional. But there's still a bunch of the kids, the grinders kids, they're waiting, and like they've made a pact. Like I'm okay with them seeing it. They're in this film, and Robert as well. He's waiting for an opportunity for me to be there with him. So we'll see how that goes.
Oh, that's nice. Great. And another question we have here is, how has this experience informed your present life regarding life choices, family relationships as an adult?
Uh, well, I mean, if anything, it makes me realize life's short. You've got to make the most of the time, you have. I mean, it just seems like it was a blink of an eye since that all happened, but it was a quarter of a century. And it's kind of weird to think about right now. I think overall, though, for me, I mean, it's funny, like the little things sometimes still really get me, and I still don't have perspective on that. But it's the big things that ultimately, when people start panicking, I just take a deep breath and remember what we went through, and so that's how I get through those sort of major things. So it's just enabled me to have a different outlook on how you can overcome major obstacles in your life. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. And so I would love to ask you, the camera is right behind you. Can't help but notice. And you were telling me before we went live that those are all the tapes, right?
Just this right here, this group of tapes right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of them are 2 hour long, so there's more material than that looks, but that's about 26 hours of footage, which as a kid, well, young adult, whatever I was, seemed like an amazing amount of footage. I couldn't believe how much I'd shot. But then in trying to put it together, and later as a professional cameraman and filmmaker, I that's just scratching the surface of most of the things I do. I usually will shoot hundreds of hours of stuff now, or deal with hundreds of hours that other people have shot. So it's really an incredible ratio in terms of what actually ended up being in the film. It really wasn't all that much. And you would think, oh, well, then you can get through it quickly, but it wasn't like that. There were so many small snippets, and it just had to try and figure out how to make it all kind of come together and seem seamless. Was not easy.
Yeah, no, I was curious if there were any key moments that you perhaps kept out because it didn't quite fit into the quote unquote story of the movie.
No, I mean, if anything was left out, it's because I didn't really shoot it, and that was probably the hardest thing. Was I didn't actually start filming for a number of months into the kidnapping. So there's a certain point in the film where it actually, the footage catches up to the story, if that makes any sense, and it almost plays a lot. It's a certain point that I always like let my breath go, because I'm just like, once you're there, it's just happening. It's just happening in front of you. But to set the whole story up, particularly without having the footage from the very beginning, that was always the most difficult part of the film. And for me, the first 20 minutes of the film are always the most difficult to get through. And it's like, once you start getting through all that, I mean, there's all this information. There's so much information, and it's trying to find that balance of how much is enough, without going overboard, and keeping in mind how much time is passing. But it was just to get everybody up to speed, so that once we're about 25 minutes or so into it, it's all sort of on autoplay, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would love to hear more about the choice to have, voiceovers and those interviews, but not having, talking heads. I think a lot of filmmakers might lean into that more. Not that that's a bad thing, but you clearly chose not to do that. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, so voiceover, first of all, I tried not to be in it at all, and that wasn't working. People, when I was testing it, a few years ago, people just had to know that it was the filmmaker the son, they had to know it was my perspective, is what I found. So I had to kind of be in it a little bit, but I tried to be in it as minimally as possible. And when I'm done, I'm like, whew, thank goodness, we can get on with this thing now. But as far as the voiceovers of the interviewees, that wasn't the original design. It's one of my favorite things about the film now. I'm so glad that that's the route that we took. But I shot those interviews in 2003 and 2005, in the days when it was still a standard definition world. So this was all standard definition material, and it cost a lot of money and took a lot of time to do it. And then I put the film away. So when I revisited it in 2017 or whatever, the world had moved on to we were now an HD world. And so my choice was to put this not so great looking footage into, nobody was ever going to give me a hard time about the archival footage. I knew that, but interview footage, it's got to look good, and it just wasn't keeping up with the times. I didn't want to go back and make everybody relive all those details again. And so much time had passed, I just wasn't sure that I could get there again. But also my mom had passed away. And so I obviously wasn't going to get another opportunity to shoot her. I'd also seen the movie Senna. I don't know if you've seen Senna.
I have seen Senna.
When I saw Senna, it was like a revelation to me. Because I mean, they had all this amazing footage, and it was just voice of his sister or voice of this newscaster, and they never cut to these talking heads. And I just thought it was the most immersive way to tell a documentary story that I could think of. But I was almost depressed, or actually was depressed after I saw it, because I just felt like I could never do something like that. I didn't even aspire to do it, but because I just couldn't imagine that I had enough footage to do it. But I had a producer who came on board in about 2017. He actually just came in as an editor. Like, I just wanted to show him where I was going with it and just get his notes. And he sort of became obsessed with it. And his name is Eric F. Martin. He's my producer. But one of the things that he, kept encouraging me to do was like, why don't you try covering up, more, to cover up more. And what I lost in terms of a look from my mom or from Claudia or whatever from this interview footage, I think I gained just in it being immersive itself. And that probably was a 6-month process in itself, just going through what I already had and just covering up the talking heads and finding the right shot and everything. And it was a big day when I finally got the film to play from beginning to end without a talking head.
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay, we have a couple more questions from the audience. One is, how much of your dad's diary did you read?
Well, I read it all. I have all the, I mean, it was published into a book, it's right back over here, but it was published into a book. So I use that as sort of my main reference to get, to find the information I was looking for. But then I actually have, obviously, the actual handwritten diaries, and then I would go and find these little snippets and then scan them and put them into the film. Originally I was going to try and, his diaries were much more prominent and presented as diary, like it would say it was his diary, and there were much more complete captions, more about his experience. But we found that by going with this more cryptic idea, just little snippets of his diaries, like the audience wouldn't really necessarily know, are those his diaries? Are they his diaries? They seem like they are. How would they have gotten those diaries? And then it has this sort of reveal at the end, which became a lot more powerful by presenting the diaries in the way that we've done it in the film now.
Right, okay. Another question is, in these days, the FBI or a Chris Voss type of professional would be handling negotiations. Was that not available then? And why were you all out there on your own?
Well, it's, these days, I don't even know if these days you would be, because we're in a foreign country. It's like the FBI doesn't have any jurisdiction in a country like that. Oscar was an FBI agent helping us. The only thing that they could do was help us in an advisory capacity, and officially the U.S. government, their stance is that they don't negotiate with terrorists. So there was technically there was no way that they could do that for us anyway. And we lived overseas all of our lives, so we were, that made sense to us right away. Like, you can't rely on the U.S. government when you're living in Colombia. The U.S. government, they don't control things there. So that was the main thing. And the reason why we were so on our own was it was Colombia in a very volatile period of their history. And people would kill you for a lot less than that ransom money that we were transferring across town, so everything had to be kept, under wraps as much as possible. And that's why we were on our own. The government knew what we were doing, but only just to the level that we had to let them know. Everything else we kept kept under wraps.
Right. And then the final one we have here is, was this event sort of a looming presence in your lives, or were you able to get back to feeling normal at some point? I think that's implying post, like once your father was returned.
Well, no, it 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 completely changed the course of everybody's lives. I mean, my parents in particular, my dad, came out of it alive, but he had a whole different, he had to rebuild his career from kind of from scratch in a way. Um, and they had planned, my parents had planned on living overseas for maybe another decade or so, but they found themselves back in the US just trying to figure out what to do. I think my dad really did well as somebody who went through that kind of experience could have. He had been a soldier in Vietnam and had learned a lot from PTSD and all that, the experiences that he had then. And so I think that helped him. And the fact that he was able to, you know, uh, um, make his thoughts or write his thoughts into these diaries, I think that's what saved him. So afterwards, he just had, he was in pretty good mental shape, but he definitely had this real need to share his story. He'd been isolated for this year and he had been given this second chance in life. So he wanted to go out, experience the world, talk to people, share his experiences. And that's not the case with a lot of hostage families that we know of. Some people victims cannot speak about it. But my dad that was not the case for him. It was more the case for my mom. She was sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum. She didn't want to go out into the world and share the story. She wanted to kind of retreat, which was very unlike her because she'd grown up all over the world, all of her life. So she sort of became, I don't want to say a complete hermit, but she did start to isolate herself in Galveston in the in the years that followed. And for me, I mean, I think me and for my brother, I think we're both fairly normal and we're able to maintain fairly normal lives. But I can't say that spending, having this looming 25-year thing over your shoulders is exactly normal. I obviously had this real need to get it off my chest. And now I'm only just now entering into this whole new phase of it slowly making its way out into the world. And so I'm only just now coming to terms with kind of the accomplishment of all of that.
Yeah, because it's I imagine it would be such a cathartic feeling in a lot of ways. And it's sort of, you were using it, maybe, I don't want to speak for you, but as a coping mechanism then, and it's sort of an interesting way to sort of process and deal with those emotions again.
Yeah, it definitely is. But I think what's made it kind of so unusual right now is that, I'd sort of been in a self-imposed isolation in order to make the film, and then so I was really ready to get out there and start just seeing how it resonated with audiences and, just sharing it, seeing where they laugh, seeing where, or if they cry or, whatever. And I have yet to really have that experience, so it's cathartic, but not, it's all, I've said this before, but it's all sort of in this slow motion kind of way, like in little piecemeal bits. Yeah. So we'll see. But when I look at, even since when it was released and first played in June in AFI Docs, a lot has happened. It's gone to a lot of festivals. We've had, really nice things said about it. A lot of great people, people have contacted me about it. It's the cumulative whole is really starting to shape up into something. And that's, I'm starting to feel it, it's good. It's a good feeling.
I'm sure, I bet. So we have to wrap up in a minute, but I am really curious. I just have to know, this movie that came out in 2000, Proof of Life. What was that like for you to have that kind of be created based on your own family, your own life?
Well, so we knew what we were getting into. My family did, and there are several different companies and things like that had pursued the rights to the story. There was like a company that wanted to do like a movie of the week on, for whatever. Taylor Hackford was the director, extremely accomplished director. He was going to have this A-list cast. It seemed like the story that had the most legs or whatever. And although we knew right from the get-go that it was a complete departure from what actually happened, they didn't say it was a Tom Hargrove story. It's not even Colombia. It's a fictitious country. so there was enough there for it to be like, yeah, it's not our story, and you, I always knew that I wanted to make this film, and I'm like, well, it's definitely not treading on this film's territory. So I really, there's nothing to really worry about there. But I do, the director Taylor Hackford and the screenwriter Tony Gilroy, who's amazing. They saw some of the footage as they were starting to make the film, and then when the film actually went into production, I just graduated from college, and I'd gotten some experience as a PA on Walker, Texas Ranger. And I sent my resume into the director hoping to get a job on the film. And he gave me the job of doing the making of that film. And so that was a bizarre thing in its own right. I was 4 months in Ecuador working on this film that was inspired by my dad's story. And most of the time I felt like it was just a film about somebody else. But the kidnapping scenes themselves, there was a crazy Colombian character named Huaco who was smoking crack, and all those things were based on a lot of things that really happened with my dad. So when we were actually at 14,000 feet and I was looking at this guy in a tent and the hostage, there were some really surreal moments, particularly in those kinds of environments.
Oh, that's incredible. Well, thank you so much. I wish we could keep talking, but thank you so much for joining us. This has been such a pleasure for me. As I said before, I'm such a big fan of this movie, and really excited to have it at the festival this year. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I hope everybody has enjoyed the film. And I'm honored to be your guest. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, for everyone at home tuning in, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, and take care.